Hi, my name's Tori and I wish I knew more about blood products.
Hi, my name's Letitia. I wish I knew more about taking care of myself when starting shift work.
Hi, my name is Lydia. I wish I would know more about how to work as in a team and solve conflict.
Hello, welcome to 5 Things, the nursing podcast from the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. My name is Liz Crowe.
I'm Jesse Spur, and this is a podcast by, for, and with the amazing nurses and health professionals in our corner of the world. We hope to connect with a global community as we move from surviving to thriving. Welcome to 5 Things.
Hello, my name is Liz Crowe.
And I'm Jesse Spur.
Welcome to another episode of 5 Things. And today we're going to talk about debriefing to learn in the clinical context of a hospital. And Jesse and I are going to have a discussion around this based on years of clinical debriefing, some academic work around it, and a general interest and passion for debriefing.
Awesome. Once again, conflict of interest disclosed.
We do have a bias, but it is very much embedded on contemporary research and contemporary experience and a very comprehensive range of debriefing experiences where we have been both facilitators and participants.
Excellent. So we're just going to do a little bit of a recap of episode 85 in our first point, which is debunking debrief myths. So Liz, can you give us a quick synopsis of some of the myths and some of the debunks on those?
Yeah, so if you go back to episode 85, that's all we talked about. However, we just wanted, if this is the only episode you're going to listen to, we thought it was really important to say that, 2 decades ago, a Cochrane review came out saying that single, isolated psychological debriefing was unsafe. And we completely agree with that. That process that the Cochrane review was looking at was when you had compulsory patients forced to have a one-on-one debrief with a professional. And the types of groups they did that on was not to do with clinicians. It was very much patients who'd had a stillbirth, patients who were on active burns, people who'd been assaulted to the point they'd had to come into an emergency department, not based on clinician growth, development, well-being. So out of that, debriefing just got a really bad rap. And despite multiple articles coming out subsequently saying this is really important, the latest being Paxino 2024, with a friend of ours, Beck Sabo, being involved in that, where they looked at, I think it was 46 papers, showing that debriefing in actual fact improves resuscitation, improves communication, improves relationships in teams, improves safety and quality for our patients, creates high performance. What ultimately comes down to whenever you mention debriefing, someone will say, isn't that dangerous? And we're like, no. It can be dangerous if you have a debrief being facilitated by someone who's a narcissist and just wants to tell everyone what they did right and what everyone else did wrong.
Working with those people can be dangerous too, though.
Yeah, that's right. Like usually people this isn't the first time the team has had challenging conversations with that individual. So there are circumstances, but on the whole, debriefing is a process to learn, and that is not dangerous.
Excellent.
Okay, Jesse, can you talk us through number 2, which is what is debriefing to learn?
Well, I think debriefing to learn is somewhat in the name of it, but it's coming together with a group agenda to actually learn from and make sense of something that's happened. A shared experience is basically the really, really crude summary of it. We talked about in the last episode about a paper by Michaela Colbert and colleagues that really grouped the reasons that we might debrief into 3 kind of main categories. First is debriefing to learn. So that's actually with an objective to either improve performance, mitigate gaps in performance, set an agenda for future development, growth. It's in the title, growth orientated. The second reason that was proposed, and from the study of the literature on this, is debriefing for psychological, therapeutic reasons, or prevention or treatment of psychological harm from an event, and that really falls into that category of what was explored in the Cochrane Review article, the articles that informed the Cochrane Review, and we're actually saying that this isn't the right avenue for it, and as did Michaela's paper. And the third is debriefing to manage, which kind of coexists with debriefing to learn often. We don't necessarily pull that apart. They're not things that naturally split apart in our psyche.
No.
Often debriefing to learn from a situation helps us manage going forward because it makes us feel like we'll be better equipped for the future with it. But it can also help with, I guess, sharing and diffusing the emotional state that's all arranged in a continuum of normal.
Yeah. Can you talk to us, because a big part of debriefing to learn and debriefing even after simulation is about the importance of getting everyone on the same page, or what we call the same shared mental model. Can you talk to us a little bit about why is that so important?
Well, I think naturally we try and make sense of things, and our brains do that on autopilot. Our subconscious does that. So what we're trying to do is actually establish a clear kind of facts are agreed by sort of social norming, social definition. So as a group of people that have had an experience, essentially the facts are really what everyone agrees that they remember, and sort of modify the accuracy that back and forth to a point where that's the agreed facts of what's happened. Facts are a social construct. They can be formed and based on evidence or expertise, and all of these other things will influence that social organising of it. But that's what we're doing essentially, is organising a platform for the facts of what's happening, which kind of can then take away that potential in some people for ruminations and self-decrimination, I suppose, about I did this wrong, so that was what caused this. And that can happen in the absence of that kind of shared observation, the perspective taking from one another.
And look, the more I learn about memory, and we did a great episode with Gail Robinson on memory on this podcast, is the more you realise that memory is very much socially constructed, that memory is often really based on emotions at the time, and we're actually pretty poor at recalling things accurately, even moments after it had occurred. And sometimes a real power and a great hot debrief is me saying I know why this happened. It's because I did that. And people saying, oh no, first of all, that's not what happened. And secondly, no, that they're not the facts. And I was involved in a debrief once where a junior nurse recognised patient deterioration, hit the button. It just so happened it was ward round. The whole team were there within 47 seconds. Resuscitation occurred. The patient did really well. It was distressing for lots of people. It always is, but we had a good outcome. We decided to still have a cold debrief about that because what are the learnings and a point to get together. That's what we're all about. And in that debrief, she said, I feel really angry at the team that I was working on my own in isolation for about 10 minutes before someone came in the room. That was her memory of it. That was her feeling. If any of you have ever been involved in anything where you're waiting for help, every second feels like 30 minutes. So it's very hard for us to calculate time. And so the debrief isn't about going, oh, you're an idiot and that's stupid. It's like, I'm really sorry that you felt that way. When we look at the notes, we commenced scribing within about a minute of you hitting the alarm. And she was like, oh my God, I swear I was in here by myself. And she wasn't. So it's so important, isn't it, during this debriefing to learn to get on that same shared mental model, because sometimes we've told ourselves things that simply are not true.
Absolutely. So we started with that kind of broad principles of the debrief to learn. We're going to dig in a little bit more into how does this happen? How does the debriefing for growth and development actually happen?
So we've got a really junior workforce at the moment. And so often in the debriefs I'm involved in this hospital currently, I often ask the question, if we've been doing it after a resuscitation or a death, who here was their first resuscitation? It's about 60% of the room. And when it's a death, it's about 70% of the room, it's their first death. So given that lots of hospitals now don't build tea rooms big enough for their staff to participate, that COVID kind of eliminated that kind of culture of us getting together in the tea room and unpacking our days and what happened or debriefing it in an informal sense, we have to now intentionally and consciously get together as a group to say, okay, how are we going? What are the things that we think we did exceptionally well that we want to replicate? And that's your growth and development. And there can be growth and development even when things haven't gone well, because the learning is I'm not going to make that mistake again. Growth and development as part of debriefing should also be very much senior staff mentoring, normalizing what is completely abnormal outside the hospital context. You know, if you work in retail, if you're a cleaner, if you're a florist, you're not going to see the things that we see. So what we do isn't normal, but it's normal for us. And I think a big part of growth and development and where the power can really lie is when senior staff show vulnerability or say, I didn't know. I thought this was the best course of action and actually I was incorrect, or this is on me, or, you know, I've got to say this is a case that broke my heart. You know, like recently I was involved in a debrief where emergency consultant with 30 plus years experience said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And all the junior nurses are like, that was really important for us to hear. It's completely normalised our response to it.
I can remember vividly, and it's something that I've kind of just indoctrinated into my own way of thinking about things, which I guess was learning how to cope about and reframe a situation from a very experienced ICU nurse when I was a new graduate. And we'd had a really nasty outcome of a fairly predictably nasty and prolonged, critically unwell older patient in our unit. And she said, you just got to remember this isn't happening to you. You're part of that story for the family and for the patient, but it's not happening to you. And it was a really helpful way of me kind of avoiding just that complete kind of suppression and numbing of yourself to detach and feeling like there's still something you can do in that. Like it wasn't happening to me, but it's very easy to write yourself into the story of someone else. So it's their grief, their loss. We've had skin in the game in that and feel it, but we've also had the opportunity to make that as uncrappy as possible for that family. So that is something that sticks with me. That essentially was something I learned from an informal debrief.
And look, I can say, hand on heart, some of the most powerful, important learnings for me, psychologically, educationally, clinically, have all come out of debriefs. And Dr. Phil Sargent was a very experienced pediatric intensive care specialist who is now retired. But I remember him in a debrief when someone said, but we failed. This didn't go well. He was like, one of the big learnings for me as a clinician was focus on the process, get the process right every single time, because sometimes people are too broken, too sick, too mentally unwell, for us to ever fix them, no matter what our skill is, no matter what our intention, our drive, our motivation, no matter how much effort we put in. But if you get the process right, you'll always be able to live with yourself. And again, big aha moment for me is that do every step along the way as well as you can. And while it can still be painful and it can still hurt and maybe you cry a bit like sometimes, if you've got the process as good as you possibly can, and if the process wasn't as good as it can, what are the learnings to make sure that next time it is, you can live with it?
And I think that's a really good point to nearly wrap up on this point. But I think as well, the power of the group in this situation can help the whole unit or whole department develop and grow. And that's one of the other benefits of doing this as a group is that the lessons that we've learned, that group, it owns those lessons, but then gets the opportunity at the end of a debrief, a well-structured debrief, to decide as a group what needs to be communicated with the rest of the broader team or outside of our team as well. So there's an opportunity that would be completely potentially lost or left to individuals to go and follow up, that group can go, no, this is important enough that we need to share this with the entire team, make an ergonomic change in our resource bay, make sure a phone number is displayed somewhere. So all of these little practical ergonomic team communication, clinical knowledge, clinical skill issues can be essentially done with a fairly high level learning needs analysis as a team.
Absolutely. So our number 4 as part of debriefing to learn is the importance of communication as part of that learning process. Can you talk us through that?
It's a massive topic. And when we start talking about communication, it's really easy to just throw around those platitudes, those domain level things. Like communicate well and effectively, have good situation, like the crisis management stuff, or there was really good, the team leader shared their mental model well. Like it doesn't mean anything. So I think it's a bit like the difference between a TikTok and a long form podcast.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at debriefing, rather than just a platitude about, you communicated really well in that. We can peel off those layers. So there's that one aspect of understanding communication in the real terms of actually ideally getting to a point where you can even talk about things like power, hierarchy, things that got in the way of us communicating as effectively as we could have, or things that enhanced it. There's other things like in communication that comes up there that can flow into the actual next clinical event that the members of that team have. Is debriefing. There's a lot of cross-monitoring of each other's perspectives and perspective taking if it's facilitated well and people feel safe in that situation. So perspective taking of me understanding, Liz, as the social worker, you've just had this horrific perspective of that I didn't have in that. You were out there bringing that, deciding whether to bring that family member in and expose them to what was going on. We weren't making necessarily, I've heard that you didn't feel like we were making time and space to actually understand what your risk perspective of that was. That could be something that's just completely lost, and you carry away from that angry at someone on the team, or just a general sense of being stuck in that situation that we never know. So it's I guess one of the biggest points I can make about debriefing is debriefing can set up an openness to communication that keeps future communication open.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And I think, the other thing is that embarrassingly, despite the fact that I was trained to be a therapist or a counsellor, it was debriefing that really taught me to listen, to really actively listen and attune myself to every member of the group, and to not just speak for the sake of speaking, to sit sometimes with being uncomfortable. And that is a big part of high performance teams, when people can hear things that feel uncomfortable, not criticism, not judgment, but just things like, okay, that feels uncomfortable, but there's a learning for me here that's the frame that I'm going to set it in, because I believe the intention of this debrief is to learn.
Yeah. And for me, simulation was kind of the gateway drug into debriefing. And then that has been the gateway into sort of seeing the power of debriefing techniques adopted and adapted from sim into debriefing to learn. I wouldn't say I've ever done more than pop psychology within my learning around debriefing in a sim setting, but have definitely explored a lot of other domains of performance since then, as I've got into those more high risk situations where I've been involved in a clinical event myself, and then in a situation of facilitating that. So I think there's layers to it, a bit like podcasting.
Yeah.
There's an interesting skill in communication of being able to self-monitor. Am I talking too much? What am I saying? What's bleeding out of what I'm feeling into what I'm saying? So that's that live dynamic self-monitoring, which is really hard. It takes a lot of practice to do that. And debriefing provides a good forum for that. It's also, like you said, for me, been a massive one in terms of just developing habits around deliberate attunement and listening, particularly in areas or the domains of types of listening that aren't my preference.
The other really important point to make around communication in debriefing to learn is not everyone has to speak in order to be learning. Sometimes that's not how people process things. It's not how things are helpful. So I don't think it's helpful in a debrief to go around and say, you haven't spoken, Jessie. What would you like to contribute? You know, that can be harmful. It puts people on the spot. So don't think it's helpful to go around the group and ask every person to offer a perspective. People are allowed to sit in a debrief and listen. That's can be part of their learning.
I think that's great. And that comes back to that thing of attunement. And I think you can pick that up over time as who's got something niggling that they do need to maybe coaxed to say, or not coaxed, but kind of encouraged or made more safe to see if they will want to offer that. Or even going, actually, I've observed this, and this is one of those cases where I think sometimes being involved in the clinical event, especially as a nurse, I suppose, I'm positionally lower in a hierarchy within a power base within a healthcare team than a senior staff consultant is. If I see a nurse who who I know well because I've worked with them, and I would have a good sense of what they're going through after this, and I can see we know our buddies when they're just pissed, when they're fuming, when they've got something that's just there that they're going to carry away from this, but for whatever reason they haven't reached their safety threshold to actually put it out there in the group. Sometimes my difference in position within that group might allow me to introduce that as something that I feel it's really important for us to talk about and put it on the table and take that kind of risk, but lay it out on the table of going, I saw or felt this. I think that's really important for us to talk about. What does everyone else think?
Yeah. And if people choose not to speak, that's okay. And I always say, if you're in a debrief and no one's saying anything but the facilitator, the debrief's in trouble. People don't feel psychologically safe and wrap it up quickly. And then, everyone needs to find a way to feed back that was an unhelpful process.
And we're not saying that this is something that's easy to do.
No.
And again, this is a point of advocacy for starting little, starting with the more mundane stuff, starting with the stuff that went really well and practicing kind of the patter or the feel of this, encouraging this as a group, exploring training opportunities to actually learn facilitation in these settings. This isn't about how to debrief this episode. This is about what is debriefing to learn and what are some of the benefits and or risks of it.
Yeah. And I'm going to give a plug to the Answer debriefing tool because anyone, there's no financial gain for me in that, even though I wrote it, but anyone can look it up. If you just type in ANZCA, debriefing, it will come up and there's 14 and a half hours worth of contemporary research and understanding around debrief there for anyone to look up.
Awesome. So we're going to build on topic 4 of communication. We kind of touched into it a little bit, but 5 is this point about debriefing can foster a sense of belonging.
Yeah. So what I did clearly study in my PhD was around staff wellbeing, particularly in critical care environments. And what I have found in my thesis and then subsequently that the 3 foundational pillars of wellbeing at work start with number 1, belonging, number 2, being able to find meaning and purpose, and number 3, mastery of skills. And debriefing to learn ticks every single one of those boxes. So, for those of us who are older, more mature in age, when we first started working in healthcare, you knew everyone. You often knew everyone in the whole hospital, but you definitely knew everyone in your ward. And you knew them really well because our teams were small. And so people would often say, it felt like a family situation. Now, many of us work in very big healthcare teams where we would be doing what Amy Edmondson refers to as teaming all day. So that's instead of like belonging, that every day that you come on, there might be someone on the shift with you that you've never met before. That the endocrine team, when you come in, you've got a team with them. And it can be quite isolating and lonely, and debriefing is one of the ways that we can build belonging, particularly amongst a whole multidisciplinary team. So if we stop regularly and frequently, even for 8 to 10 minutes, to debrief the mundane, the novel, the exceptional, the confronting, etc., it gives us a chance to say, we had this shared experience that I will never have with anyone else, and I may never see these people again, but hopefully it connected us in some ways, and we're going to take that shared experience and we're going to use it for learning, growth, development, excellence, high performance, to ensure that anything that we do in the future is better than what we did today. And so this sense of belonging, our brains are constantly seeking, do I belong and do I not belong? If you walk into a tea room, your brain is saying, safe person, not safe person. Am I going to sit down and start a conversation? Am I just going to pull out my phone and not engage? So we've got this desperate need to belong, and we have to create opportunities for that to happen. And debriefing is just one great tool to make that, to enable that to happen at work.
I think that wraps up nicely back into debriefing to learn, because the assumption is if people have signed up to stay around for it, there's a shared objective and goal to learn to do the thing that we just did better, or learn exactly what we just did awesome and why, and figure that out. I think the other thing when you're talking about these kind of multi-team systems that we work in, where there's teaming with these ad hoc teams that might be in our regular workplace, but the staff aren't constant, or there might be teams coming together with different perspectives and objectives on the care of the same patient, which there's been some other work referring to them as smash teams, which I like because it's like atoms colliding at times. The debrief might be the first time that you actually even learn the person's name.
Absolutely.
Rather than their role.
Yeah. And look, I think, what I found in my thesis that was really surprising to me is when we talk about meaning and purpose, everyone just assumes that we're talking about the meaning and altruism that comes from helping patients on their worst day. And hopefully that is part of it. But meaning and purpose really strongly came out in belonging to a team. If I belong to a team and I'm seen not just as a body, but as a human being who's got skills and resources or growth and potential, and people stop and think I'm worthwhile investing in, that's meaningful to people. If people are able to say, you know what, this person is alive today, or this person is having a better experience, or their rehabilitation is easier, or their outpatient appointment went better because of my role in a very big cog in the system was done well and allowed efficiency and processes to happen better, that's very meaningful. If I believe that the physiotherapist and the consultant and the admin person all think that I did a good job, then that's meaningful to me. So this whole thing of belonging can really be cemented and improved by regularly engaging in debriefing to learn.
Sounds great.
Do it, people. Do it. All right.
Or look at how to learn how to do it and what tools are out there and what frameworks to support it, I suppose, in whatever organisation you're in. We're not saying just run off and start having a crack at this.
Yeah.
But at the lower risk area of it, getting some of your colleagues together after something's gone really, really well and having a chat about it can be a great low-risk starting point.
Exactly. All right, let's try and summarise debriefing to learn. Number 1, debunking debriefing myths. And basically, debriefing got a really bad reputation that it is finding exceptionally hard to outlive, despite the fact that we have had multiple publications demonstrating the importance of debriefing for high performance, for improvement in clinical skills, for well-being, for, it just can't outlive that reputation. So that's a myth. Number 2 was debriefing to learn. And this is all about that debriefing really is this great free instrument available to all of us where we, first of all, get on the same shared mental model. Then we say, like, what actually worked exceptionally well? What are we proud of? What would we like to replicate again in the future? Then to say, what would we improve? What would we change if we had this exact same event, patient happen in the next hour or two? Like, what were the learnings? And then to think, is there anything from a systems point of view that needs to change? Do we need a phone number written on the wall? Are the clocks all out of sync? Would it have been great to know that blood bank had moved? And what do we collectively as a group want to push up the food chain and have changed from a systems point of view? Number 3 is debriefing to learn can create opportunities for growth and development. And we spoke about that's not just for individuals. That's not just growth and development for the team, but that can be growth and development of a culture and a maturity and teaching us how to communicate better, how to be involved better, how to be a better clinician, how to be a better colleague, how, to genuinely look at the fact that what we do is complex and dynamic, and there are always opportunities to improve. Number 4 was talking about debriefing to learn and how it improves insights and learnings about your communication. And you were saying not just in a pithy little way, but really about who am I as a communicator? What do I tend to do well? What do I not do well? How do I become more attuned to people? How do I get better at listening? Why am I speaking? Am I offering something, or am I just like the sound of my own voice? And that those skills learnt in a debriefing to learn around communication can then change the way that we communicate and have a culture on the ward, and also within the hospital.
It's an antidote to mansplaining.
Oh, such an antidote to mansplaining. All right. Number 5 is debriefing to learn can create a sense of belonging. And as we start to become a part of these super teams, and we have to team with multiple teams over and over again in complex environments, we all have a desperate need to belong. And for people to take the time and debrief is an acknowledgement that each and every one of us is important, and that we have a right and a need to improve, and that we have a need to belong. And belonging is so fundamentally important to our overall well-being as individuals and as part of a giant system, and a really wonderful, element of debriefing. That's it.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Jessie.
The Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital 5 Things Nursing podcast acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands we now tread. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of healing, teaching and learning. We also wish to acknowledge the First Nations people of the lands of our global community and encourage our listeners to seek out, listen and learn from the knowledge held in your shared space. As well as all major podcast outlets, you can find us at 5thingsnursing.podbean.com. Please also subscribe and give us a rating on your listening platform of choice. This helps others find the podcast. And finally, if you'd like to connect with Liz or myself on Twitter, we can be found at LizCrow2, and for me, it's inject_orange. We would absolutely love to hear your thoughts, ideas, or feedback. Thanks for listening to 5 Things